Hey, okay, we're back. How you doing today, Raimy?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you. I gotta say, it was a lot of good feedback from the last episode, which I loved. And just a lot of people that I didn't know at all, just who knew Jeremy, and that was good. It just felt like okay, the guest thing. I feel like the guest thing is a little addictive, but in the sense that you always want to have a guest because I think it makes the conversation just a different kind of conversation. But yeah, I'm sort of stoked and happy where it's going. Obviously, I love a bigger audience, but for the sake of where we are right now, that was really good. That last conversation, both of them were really good. So
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's part of one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is because I've been learning a ton from it, which wasn't something I necessarily expected to do, was actually learn, but it's been tremendous, and certainly bringing on these experts who just know their niche really, really well. It's I'm going to learn a lot from it, so I'm excited to keep bringing them on.
good. Okay, let's get to our good of the week. Actually, first, I keep reminding myself I got to do this first. I want to thank everyone who does join us every time we do this as an audience member, as a listener, as a commenter. Not enough comments on the social media platforms, but good comments. People chiming in with their ideas, with their thoughts, with their guests, with their topics. And I want to encourage more people to subscribe and like the episode, share them wherever they are, chime in with a comment. You can disagree. I'm okay with that. I can handle it. And just participate. Join this conversation with us each and every time we have an episode on every subject with every guest. And we look forward to continuing to grow this as we move into now. We're now in double digits in terms of episodes. It's just that's my weekly announcements. Those will get better over time. But yeah, okay.
It's pretty good. That was good.
I am not a seasoned a reader of news or whatever you want to call them.
The
Yeah.
enthusiasm
Anyway,
certainly came through. I'll say that much.
thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, go. Good of the week.
Okay, so my good of the week comes from an unexpected source. It is my accountant, which I think is probably was not on anyone's bingo card. I'm
The
guessing,
first. I think it's a first. Other than
and and it's not even because he got me back money by any sort of way. This is not financial at all.
the only other person I ever heard like shout out to their accountant was Shaquille O'Neal. Early, like he talked early on about the person who really helped him was his nice accountant. Um, but anyway, yeah, go ahead.
This may surprise you, but Shaq and I are not in the same tax bracket. We do not share an accountant. I will not be referencing Shaq's accountant, but it's nice to know that he likes his as well. But the reason why my accountant is my pick for good of the week is because as an American living in Israel, taxes are a little bit more complicated than they might otherwise be. And I had a meeting with my accountant last week. Things changed in my life and things are moving around financially, and it was complicated, and that's stuff that largely goes over my head. So my wife and I went into our accountant and met with him, and we went through all the options, and he was helping us figure it out, and it was great and standard, and I couldn't wait to get out of there because, again, it stresses me out, and it was going over my head. But at the very end of the meeting, he turns to me and he says, by the way, what do you do? Like, what is your, I know what your job title is. I know the general sector that you're in the nonprofit sector, but what do you do? And he spent a couple minutes asking me and asking some follow-up questions. And then he said, if you wouldn't mind, when you get home, write me an email that just summarizes what you do. Because off the top of my head, I can think of a couple people that I could introduce you to you don't know where it could lead. Those conversations could lead networking. And it was so unexpected and from an unexpected source. Not that he's not a nice guy. He is a nice guy, but he could have easily ended the meeting and just been like, okay, like I provided the service that I was hired to do. I gave him tax advice and he didn't. And I followed up with him and he's reaching out for me and connecting me to people. So I'll shout him out here, right? For people that need an Israeli accountant, Americans that need an Israeli accountant in Israel. Itzik Piton. Guy is super nice guy. He's done well by me financially, and he's looking out for me from a business perspective as well. So go my accountant.
Well, it's like, and everyone benefits. The more business you have, the more business he has, right?
He made that joke as well, but that I don't think that's where it came from.
Secretly having majored in accounting early on, so I'm part of the club in that sense only. But okay, I love it. That's such an unexpected source of a thank you for the week. By the way, your accountant and Shaq's accountant do have one thing in common: Jewish. Okay, anyway, at least at the time, I don't know who he uses now, but at the time, he talked about it. That's why he always used to say like L'chaim in all kinds of different places, because that was like his one burger. Anyway, I love it. It is an unexpected source. I love that you're finding goods of the week in unexpected locations and places. Maybe I should sort of like zoom out a little bit and give myself some space to think about those things like that.
Well, I got to tell you, just doing this exercise, it is like an exercise in gratitude. It's like I really am I'm on the lookout for it now, and it's like I don't know, it's a nice little thing that keeps me on my toes and looking out for the good things in life.
Got it. I'm going to actually stay in the field.
Okay.
I signed up for something called the Monthly Giving Summit. Maybe you saw it on LinkedIn or other places. Monthly Giving Summit was started by Dana Snyder, who was a fairly well-known nonprofit person. I don't know how else to describe her. I think she's specifically more in marketing on some level, but she has made monthly giving like her obsession. That's the term she used. And she started something earlier this like academic year, let's call it the Monthly Giving Summit, where it's an online conference. She brings together a lot of people in that space and talks about a lot of the different subjects. So the first time they did it, I think in September, it had like 1,000 people, a little more than 1,000 people who registered. I don't know how many people were on it during it. And then the second one started yesterday. It's yesterday and today. And she had over 4,000 people register for the monthly giving. And so I registered just because I register for a lot of things, and most of them I don't go to because I like the content usually that they share after, or the access to the videos and PDFs and stuff like that. And the content, the network, a lot of it is also valuable just to sort of see who's there. But last night I was like, I'm going to go on. I went on right as it started. There were 1,000 people already on we call it the Zoom, the video conference. When I joined at 8 p.m. local time, I'm from all over the place. I learned a little, certainly a lot about monthly giving. I need to always know more about that subject because it's a growing thing. And I would tell you two things about it. Three things. One, the quality of the people who were presenters was really, really high level, which is great, as were the sponsors. Two, the energy that she brings, but also the energy that a lot of the people who are running different sessions is palpable and noticeable, and it affects the whole thing. So the chat is very much alive while it's going on, because there's just this like an energy that she brings, or that she creates, or someone is creating around it, that makes it a very, I would say happy, but like a happy-ish kind of place to be around a subject that I don't know that people necessarily find to be the most interesting subject. And then number three was actual fact, was she talked just about numbers in terms of monthly giving, this very small percentage that monthly giving actually plays in the industry, but the upside, the tremendous upside that monthly giving, recurring giving can have if you simply move the needle just a little bit. She was talking very globally in terms of just like nationally in the United States, in terms of the billions of dollars that are sort of missing. But that was an interesting point in terms of thinking about how to move organizations from, one-time gifts to sustainable giving, to monthly giving, recurring giving. It's a subject we should absolutely talk about here and bring on some people to talk about it, to see how they do it and more about it. But I just thought as a conference that's happening right now in a virtual space, really interesting and just a really good subject.
That's awesome. It's awesome on all of those fronts. I found it's one thing we sort of got good at as a society, creating energy in a physical space. So if you bring someone together in a conference or just for an in-person summit, then I think there are sort of things that there's playbooks that you can execute to get that atmosphere really energetic. If there is one for online events, I don't know if it's been perfected yet. I found that I've been to a bunch where it's like the chat is just crickets, and you want it to be energetic. So it's really impressive that they're able to pull that together. And I'm sure those playbooks are being written. I'm sure there's best practices out there, but it's really awesome to be able to feel that energy virtually, because I think that's really, really hard. So that's awesome. And the subject of monthly giving is super awesome. I think you put that really well, that small changes can make a really big difference, because for a lot of donors that are giving one-time gifts, they can turn those one-time gifts into monthly gifts, and that's sustainable and more money. And it doesn't feel like it on paper, but it's part of that mindset shift of thinking of donors as really of their lifetime value or their annual value, as opposed to a one-time gift value. And when you think of it that way, donor stewardship just is a whole different ballgame. So very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about it more because I think it's a really important subject. It talked about mindset, the mindset of recurring as the primary mindset as opposed to single gift, which I thought was an interesting mindset shift that somebody would have to have in this space. But it's definitely worth exploring at a much greater, much deeper level, and really find people who have done it well and educate a lot of other people around that subject. So anyway, so that's going on right now. As I said, usually I don't participate in these kinds of. I glossed over them. I was like, it didn't cost anything to sign up. There was like no friction at all in being a participant. So yeah, and I've tried on a webinar or two where I've given a webinar and I've tried to get people to engage in the chat. And it's a struggle to also lead the session, talk in the session, get people to comment in the chat, question in the chat, participate in the chat. Like you almost need like a second pair of hands who's running it in that space. But like to do both it's very hard to actually do. And then if you triplicate it in terms of a hybrid event, which, as you know, I don't like, physical and virtual, it makes it even more difficult.
Is that what this was? There was
No,
an in-person element?
this was
So this
her
was totally
operating
virtual.
out of her house, which made it even better because she wasn't in a studio. She was like in an office in her home, and everybody else was also like in rooms everywhere. And it worked. Right? It worked because you had the sponsorships that made it possible. You didn't have to rent space so that, no one had to travel. So like there's a lot of benefits in the virtual in that way. And you can get people from like everywhere to participate. So, anyway, okay. Good one. Both good ones. Totally different, but really, really good. Okay. Deep breath. Subject of the week. Here we go. So it's 2025 and you've decided to start a nonprofit. Okay, that's our conversation for the day. So I'll intro it this way, and I'll set you up with the first. I'm not going to call it a softball question, but the first question to start it off is this: launching a nonprofit is noble and it can be fulfilling as a mission, but the truth is a massive undertaking and it's hard. And there's no other way to say it. It's hard. And so the reality of it is that most nonprofits fail in a very short period of time within the first 3 to 5 years. And if you're thinking about starting one, there are, I think, questions and considerations to think about as you're pondering starting something like this. And so I wanted to dive in with you here, two guys who've been at this, different aspects of it for a long, long time, and to see, what kind of things might stick, what kind of things to think about, what kind of questions to be concerned about, what pitfalls may be up there, how to think about it in the global sense and how to dive into it in a specific sense and really go for it there. Cool?
Cool. Love it.
Okay, good. So to give you a little background on how I prepared, I created something called my super advisory committee. Okay. I found through ChatGPT, like the 10 or 12 top people who would fit into different aspects of nonprofit work, even if they're not nonprofit people. Some of them you would recognize, like the Dan Pelotas of the world and things like that. And I posed this question to this group, right? I want to start a nonprofit in 2025. What are the things I should be thinking about? Should I even do it, right? And then each one of the people in the super advisory committee, from their perspective, based on what is known to ChatGPT and the like, chimed in with their questions, their concerns, and how to then rethink about it once you've already thought about it. Okay. So and it's created a good reality check. So here,
I have so many questions about your super advisory committee, but I'm going to stay focused. Keep going.
You want to know if you're on it?
I know I'm certainly not on any committee with Dan Pelona. That is for sure. But I'm curious who else is on.
It's amazing to see whose names it pulled up, like, which people. And then one person I eliminated, I won't say who, because I knew the person sort of tangentially, and what they were being listed for on this list is not something they actually do. Like it was like, like, come on, like, don't call yourself the expert in that if you're not. Okay. So my question for you here is to start is, should you even start one? Like, where do you start when you're thinking about starting a nonprofit? Where do you start? Where should you start?
So there are several places where I think you should start. I think this is one of those things where you can't start from any one place because there is a providing the service side of things, and then there is a making the machine run, the fundraising side of things, or revenue generation, or some sort of financial engine behind it. And I think you have to sort of start from both of those places. So questions I would ask you to really make sure you're committed to doing this are, what other organizations are currently operating in this space? Are you really addressing something that is unaddressed right now? Because if you are not, if there is some sort of duplication of services, I think that just makes it even harder in a lot of ways. We don't generally want to create competition within the nonprofit space. Not that I think competition is inherently a bad thing, but I think that starting a nonprofit where there's already a service being provided in your community or whatever that audience is has a lot more pitfalls than an organization that doesn't. So I would talk to you about what services are going to be provided, who they're going to be provided for, and what other organizations are operating in adjacent spaces. And I would talk to you.
Not the same. Those are not the same thing, right?
Okay.
I mean, meaning like I don't think they're the same. Are they the same thing in your mind? Like the first thing sounds like, what's the need that you're solving, right? Or the problem that you're solving, which is a Raimy question, right? And then the second one is somebody already solving that need?
Well,
those are related, but they're not the same question.
They are definitely related, because if someone is already even attempting to solve the need, then, well, let's say with some degree of success, then the problem is already a little bit alleviated. So let's stop talking in the abstract. Let's pick an example, right? Let's talk about people that don't have a bed to sleep in, right? So let's talk about the issue of homelessness. So I might want to address the issue of homelessness. That is a serious problem and it should be addressed. So I can look and I can see that there are homeless people in my community, and I recognize that there is a need for them. And I can also at the same time know that there are organizations that are operating in this space to make sure that they are getting food each night and not going to bed hungry. I can make sure that I can see that there are organizations that are doing some sort of vocational training so that it's like to get them out of the whatever systemic cycle that they're in. Like, and once I have a sort of a landscape of what the organizations are that are operating within that space, even if I find one, even if I don't find an organization that's specifically doing the thing that I want to do, I already know more concretely what the problem is I'm trying to address. Does that make sense?
Yes. It helps you, if you need it, to create unique space for yourself if you feel like you still have one, right? By knowing the landscape and exploring the landscape, right? When I ran the test with my super action committee, my super advisory committee, they were very blunt and said, we don't need more nonprofits. Mm-hmm. We need better nonprofits. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have to start a new one, don't start a new one, right? Yeah. So I definitely hear what you're saying there. I'm surprised actually you started in that space as opposed to saying like, typically what's the problem that you're solving, how you're planning on solving it, because that you normally how I would think you would think about that kind of a question is like, where does it come from? And then what's the mindset? And I'm so not surprised. I'm so curious as to sort of how you thought more about thinking about landscape and is that part of an assessment process that's how you're thinking about that is?
Well, I think my identifying a problem and a solution is a little bit specific to the way that fundraisers speak to donors. I don't know that, and while there's a lot of similarities in the way that I would approach just addressing a problem altogether, it's more of a business plan, right? You need some sort of like real business plan. The fact that it's a nonprofit and has a different legal status than a business is almost irrelevant at this point. What we need to do right now is figure out how you are going to distribute the service that you want to distribute. And you have to figure out how you are going to make money, or not how the entity is going to make money in order to be able to create more of that service so that you can provide it. Like it's more of just a straight business question than anything else to me right now.
How well defined does that have to be upfront? Question one. Question two, thinking about all the people who started nonprofits that I know, how self-aware were they about themselves in terms of going about what they were about to do? And is that a piece of the puzzle here that's important?
I think it is important. I think I sort of want to think this through before I say it out loud for all of our listeners, but I think that starting a nonprofit is harder than starting a business. So I do think that you need that ironed out. I do think you need a real business plan. You need those things concrete. You need that level of self-awareness. I think that it is harder to do this in the nonprofit space than it is in the for-profit space.
I feel like the second half of that sentence is about to come out. Explain what that means and what does that look like or why that's true. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with you, but I want you to flesh that out. Now that you've thought it and said it out loud, flesh that part out.
Because if you have a business, I think there is a leap of faith that you have. If you want to start a business, there's a leap of faith that you have to take at some point. I am going to put a product or service out into the world and trust that people are going to want it and pay money in exchange for that product or service, right? There's a much more, it's more disconnected in the nonprofit space, right? You have to be able to distribute your service. I'm going to assume for this conversation that this nonprofit doesn't have a revenue generating product that they're selling. So let's just stick in the service provision. I have to be able to distribute my service, but it is almost disconnected in a lot of ways from the money that's going to come in order to be able to fund the organization. There's not
no return.
Because the person that you're providing the service to is different than the person that you're going to be fundraising from. So those are two totally different avenues that you have to have figured out. You have to figure out how you are going to provide the service. And at the very same time, you have to figure out how am I going to fund the organization. In business, it's one and the same. Is someone going to pay me money for the thing that I'm going to provide them? But here you have two questions.
Right. I've heard you talk about the product. I think that was the term in the nonprofit as opposed to the product in the business. And those things are not the same. And therefore, it's probably a good time to explore that here a little bit, what that means in terms of how you might go about thinking about that system of the funding of, and then the benefit that you're providing. Do you remember what I'm talking about here? Like how you...
I do, but again, I think you're referring to something that I said about fundraising, which is, this is what I think you're referring to, that the thing that donors get in exchange for their donation is a warm feeling, a warm glow, a sense of pride, like they have just changed someone's life. That is what they get in exchange for their gift, right? And that's absolutely something that we have to deliver to them. But that's not the same thing that you're providing the actual service recipients, right? Like I might find in our landscape of homelessness throughout my community that people are feeding them and people are giving them vocational training and people are even giving them a bed to sleep in. But I have found that they don't have coats. And in the winter, no one is giving them a blanket or a coat. So they might be sleeping and eating and getting job training. They're not warm. And that breaks my heart. So I need to start a nonprofit to be able to distribute coats in the wintertime to homeless people. That's fantastic. I have to be able to do that. But that what I'm giving to homeless people at that point is a coat or a blanket. What I'm giving to a donor who gives me money in order to be able to fund that exchange is the sense like someone was just shivering. They were like on the brink of getting hypothermia. And because you donated such a generous gift, you just saved this person, doesn't have medical care, and is going to be able to get that good night's sleep. So he can go into his job interview tomorrow, get a job and get off the street. Like those are two totally separate conversations that you need to have when you're starting a nonprofit.
Right. And so, okay, I get it. So and you have to have both, obviously. I'm sort of thinking the wheels are turning as you're saying it. And as you're saying that, you're saying it, then if I'm understanding you, and then we're going to move on to a different part of this, but then you have had to have thought of what's the benefit that I'm providing, what's the service I'm providing. That's the problem solution piece of it, right? And then at the same time, you have to think about, okay, if it's going to be a nonprofit, then the funding of a nonprofit is fundamentally different in almost 99% of the cases than it would be if it's a business. And I have to think about how that part exists, and then how those things come together to create the model that's going to make this successful as well.
Correct.
Yes?
Correct. And I don't think there's that limb that you can jump off of in this space the same way there is if you have a new gadget or widget that you want to start selling. And so you open up a business to do it. It feels like you have to have this more thought out. I could be wrong about that, but that's at this point, that's what I'm thinking.
Right. And I hear it also from the standpoint that you differentiating a little bit to expand about on it in the sense that if I'm a donor here, then the return on my investment is different. And so as I'm thinking about starting this, I have to think about how I'm going to explain that, say that, show that to a donor rather than the widget product thing that they're getting as a result, which is theirs. And then as I think about, and I've talked about this, not in this format, but the ecosystem of what you're talking about So the business is almost one-to-one, right? So it's transactional to the person who's the right, the customer, and you're the seller. Yes, the product is a thing, or whatever service, whatever it is, right? Here, there's two lanes, right? So there's you to the customer, i.e. the donor, and then you to the beneficiary, and those are not the same thing. And so you've, on some level, based on what you just described, complicated your life.
Absolutely.
So stop there for a second. If you get to that point in the process and you think that through, right, and that's a lot, do you look at it and say at that point, maybe there's another way to get what, it's, if I want to get something done, I want to put blankets on people. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways I could do that. I could make the blankets, right? I could buy the blankets. I could build a business that makes blankets and then donates blankets, or I could start a nonprofit that, collects old blankets or buys new blankets and gives them out, right? Is there like a reason per se, from your perspective, that a person should start a nonprofit in that situation as opposed to something else?
I think the obvious first step before you go out and start a nonprofit is turn to the organizations that are already working in the sector and say, can I get involved? Are you looking for an expansion? Can I offer an idea and spearhead it? Like, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think it's very case specific. You could go to these organizations and say, this is something that pains me and I would like to make a difference. Here's my plan to do it, and do it from I suspect that a lot of people that are starting nonprofits are starting them because they're seeing organizations try to address a problem and ultimately not doing it in a satisfactory way. So that's my guess, that people that have started nonprofits are seeing like, oh yeah, that organization thinks they're taking care of the problem, but they're not doing it in the way that I would do it. They're not doing it in the most thoughtful way. And therefore I need to do it in my own way.
Or just on that point, before you go to the next thing, if you may be giving people way too much credit on that and not just assuming that it's pure passion, having nothing to do with anybody else.
I don't know, because there's a lot of nonprofits out there. So like, not that every single problem is being taken care of, but lots of problems are being addressed. They might not being addressed comprehensively, holistically, the best way possible. But organizations out there are trying to take care of people that are falling through the cracks of our society. So I would like to think that there's a lot of organizations out there that are doing work that we all want to see better work, but they're doing work.
And do you recommend, or have you been asked this question, to start a business as opposed to a nonprofit and do it that way?
I think that social businesses are really awesome. I think they're really awesome. I think there's also a level of complication to be able to have something that's revenue generating in order to fund something that's mission driven is tricky. But if you can pull that together, I think that's awesome, because that is inherently sustainable. That is, in a lot of ways, more sustainable than fundraising, which at total face value, fundraising isn't sustainable. It's something we have to keep doing over and over and over and over again. Whereas something that's revenue generating, it's a little bit more of a machine, or systematized.
Yeah, I wonder about that a lot. I wonder about the Tom's Shoes model a lot, or similar, right? Where they're doing it's almost like double bottom line kind of a thing, and that they're social businesses at their core, and whether or not that's a model that makes sense. I had a couple of people who over time said they wanted to start a nonprofit, and I was like, why don't you just start a business, or go to a business that's already in that, somehow related to what it is that you're trying to do, and add an additional line to what they're doing. You'll have to explain it or figure out how it works for them. Consider how that might be an easier avenue because of the funding piece of it, and because people are customers of the, and they're getting an actual benefit, not just the feeling, the warm, fuzzy feeling you talked about, but an actual benefit, the shoes, the blanket, whatever it is. That might just be an easier method to get to the, like I always say to people, if the ultimate thing is that, like, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish gets accomplished, then you don't need another organization. You just need to get it accomplished, right? I have this argument with people, and I've had this argument with people in person and online, where it's way too much about the job and not about the result. I love the people who say to me, I'm starting this organization to go out of business, right? Because if I go out of business, not because I'm bad at the business, but because we solved the problem, right? That's better. And I'm like, yeah, that is better. But too often it's so much about, like holding on to a job or staying in business because we already exist. So I wonder about this all the time. Like this one that I always joke around with you about, Scrap City on e-waste, whether or not that makes sense as a business as opposed to a nonprofit. I ran the exercise with my super advisory committee.
Amazing. What did they say?
Yeah, they said it had enough ideas in place that made it make sense as a nonprofit, but should explore opportunities with businesses that exist, like 1-800-JUNK or something like that, and see if there's an avenue there to have like a separate vertical. I was like, yeah, that would be easier because the infrastructure is already there. Anyway, beyond the scope. But I wonder about thinking about it that way, or somebody who's really entrepreneurial, but in a social benefit way of, as you said, latching onto an org that exists, joining a board, making a big donation, volunteering their time, rather than starting another business that's a nonprofit that's going to stress them out, that's going to stretch the community of supporters ever thinner, rather than just doing it a different way.
Sure. It's interesting as we're talking here because something's coming to mind. I have a total observation that I've not supported by anything I've ever read, but my observation is this that I think plays into it. Is
I feel like you're breaking ground here. Go.
I don't know that it's that groundbreaking. I think we've spoken in past episodes about different generations of donors. So I want to talk for a second about different generations of fundraising professionals, of nonprofit professionals. Something that my observation is that you have people that grew up, let's say in the 60s or 70s, that were passionate activists and got into the field of nonprofit and got into the field of fundraising because they were activists. And in order to be able to move the needle on whatever cause they found so inspiring and that they're passionate about, they needed to get into the fundraising business. So you have a lot of these folks that are probably in their 60s or 70s at this point that were career nonprofit professionals, got into the field because they were passionate about a cause and sort of learned on the job, right? They learned how to fundraise on the job. Then in the 80s, 90s, certainly in the 2000s, you started business schools and universities and started opening up programs for nonprofit professionals. And all of a sudden you can get an MBA with nonprofit management, or there's all these other degrees, master's degrees that you can get specifically for nonprofit management. And all of, because they recognize that these people that were super passionate about what they wanted to do didn't have the academic education to go and operate from the business side of things and had to learn on the job. So let's flip it. Let's now get people to have that educational experience where they can essentially get an MBA for nonprofits and then go out into the field. And I'm curious now that that generation is like firmly entrenched in the field, if there's anything there in terms of their passion or activism. There might not be. They might now just have both pieces. I don't think they necessarily had to sacrifice their activism by going to school. But I think you're seeing a lot more people that are in senior positions in nonprofits have those advanced degrees or have some sort of certificate that they've gotten by going through this process, because you need the business savvy in order to be able to operate. And that's what it comes down to.
I definitely hear that. At the same time, I know that the best fundraisers I know are not formally educated fundraisers. They're usually passionate people with a really good sense of people. Mm-hmm. And they're just masters at a skill that they have never studied.
So can I interrupt? Because I'm curious if that extends to total nonprofit organizational management or just the fundraising itself.
No, some people do learn that. I think they just naturally had it and they just learning it on the go. I think most of those people who are really great at that particular thing are the founders and they're passion people, and they're staying as passion people. And when they have to become managers, they're a disaster. And that's when it starts to break, is when they move from passion and that first out front piece of solving the world's problems and have to become administrators. And they're just like, they're way over their skis at that point, and they want to get out because that's the self-assessment piece I was asking you about before, which is, I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about a lot of problems, and too many of them actually start nonprofits instead of either joining together, finding some other solution, because they haven't said, you know, I am not right for this, or I shouldn't do this. And realizing that it's not a one-hit wonder and you figured it all out and it's over after one fundraise, but it's an ongoing, as you said, it's an ongoing sustaining difficulty that stays with you for an extended period of time. And that's when it gets hard, is when you now have to do the debits and the credits, and then you have to go, you know, slumming it to another city to go raise some money. You're like, what am I doing? This is not why I signed up for this. So I always think that that's part of this. If I want to start, this is true 100 years ago, it's still true today. If I want to start a nonprofit in 1925, as opposed to in 2025, I'd still have to ask myself the same question, but I'd have different systems obviously available to me now. But the personal piece of it is probably true, always has been true, right? It gets me to that next question, because we've talked about the first couple of ones. The third one is the funding piece, which is the business side of this. So what is somebody thinking about? What do they have to think about when they're thinking about the funding? Like, what to you is like a red flag answer? If you say someone comes to you, they have a great idea, they want to, as you said, let's use your example, they want to put blankets on the homeless, right? They can't find them homes, there aren't enough shelters, but at least they can give them a coat and hat and gloves and, you know, cozy them up for the winter, right? And you're like, oh, that's a nice idea, you know, and have you checked the other places? Yeah, I've looked at a lot of other organizations, but they're really not as grassroots to the ground as they want to be. Amazing. Okay, so you've answered two really important questions. How are you going to pay for it, right? So when you hear, when someone responds to that, what's the bad answer and what's the better answer?
So a bad answer is, I don't know where the funding's going to come from, or I'm a lone wolf right now and I need to drum up support, or
that is a bad answer. Yeah.
I haven't spoken to funding organizations, foundations that deal with this yet. Like, those are all bad answers. I think there are, generally speaking, two places that funding comes from for a nonprofit. There's many places, but let's simplify and say either it's coming from individuals or foundations. So I think that you have to certainly understand the landscape of whether you're a good candidate and eligible for foundation funding. And I would say more in my wheelhouse, because don't know so much about grants and foundations. I spent a little bit of time in a foundation, so I know the broad strokes, but that's certainly not my real area of expertise. But I would say when it comes to individuals, I think one of the most important things is going to be having a network, having a personal network of people that are going to be supportive. And ideally, those people will be supportive in terms of financial donations, but it doesn't have to be that. They could be supportive in terms of introducing you to people that will be financially supportive. They could just be people that have that business sense and are able to fill in any sort of gaps in your knowledge that it takes to start a business. There's lots of different ways that people could be supportive, but much like you assembled your advisory committee to do prep for this episode, I think that pretty much hits the nail on the head, that it's going to be much easier for anyone to go out and do this if they have a network behind them, whether that's 5 people or 15 people, more people that can say, okay, we're in this together. Here's how we're going to go and accomplish whatever you're setting out to accomplish.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. I would say if the person says to me, I have no idea how I'm going to fund this, like, I'm out. Like, you know, if the follow up is, right now I'm funding it, like, it's better, but I'm still nervous, because at some point, unless they have just a deep pockets, that's going to run out at some point, and that's not a way I want to go about it. If they said to me, we're going to get grants or foundation money, I would also run for the hills, because the timeline for them to actually get any of that money is too long for them to actually see in 2025, the winter 2025. Yeah. Like, that's a year away. They have to actually fill those out. They have to know what they're doing. Why would anyone support them if they could already support the 9 other organizations that are putting coats and whatever hats on people and start some new ones? So all those things to me are bad answers, right? At the moment, the best answer in that is I'm exceptionally wealthy and I'm funding this myself to start. Fine. Okay. I can accept that, right? Because it says 2 things. 1, I have the money, and 2, I'm willing to put that money to this cause, right? Which is something I'm always curious about with somebody, and I'll explain that more in a second. And the second one is the network. I have a deep, a bench of people, friends, family, colleagues, whatever, who have supported me in other wild and crazy endeavors before. And I already know that 5 of them are going to put up the first 100 coats, right? Whatever that is. Like, that to me is the best answer I've heard so far, is that I already know how much money I'm coming in for the first few months of what I'm doing, right? That's the other one. The thing I said before in terms of putting your money where your mouth is on that is the same thing I used to do with the peer-to-peer piece. Is I would often tell people that if you're an ambassador in a campaign, you should tell the people you're asking for money that you've already donated money, because it shows you have skin in the game and that you're invested personally in this, which I think deepens the likelihood of a person participating. So one of the questions that I was pondering in preparing for this is, if someone came to me and said they wanted to start a nonprofit, I would ask the question, would you donate to your nonprofit? And if the answer is not fast and immediately, absolutely 100%, here's why, like, I'm gone, right? Because I'm not gonna support something that you as the founder aren't so sure about. You might need more time with me in the elevator to figure out that pitch to get that to make sense. But that's an important piece of the puzzle, is if you wouldn't fund it yourself, if you could, then no one else is either. So I think that funding piece to me is like super important as a way to think about, if I'm starting this now, right? And that's how I thought about Scrap City, is like, okay, I'm going to collect e-waste, right? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to move it to where I need it to get to? How am I going to pay for doing that? Am I charging people for the service to collect their garbage and to take their garbage to a dump or recycling facility? And would I support it, right? In that sense, could I fund the first, I don't know, ton of garbage that I already collected and sitting in a box behind me here, but just from my own house? Like, I think that's the funding piece is a super important. I wasn't trying to diminish it at the outset of the conversation. It's definitely one of the first few questions that has to be asked, is how are you funding what you want to do here?
No, for sure. I'm not as quick to dismiss foundation funding as you are, with the caveat that it's just like everything else. Even though it's an organization, even though it's a foundation giving you money, it's relationship based. So if you have relationships with foundations, if you're not starting from scratch, if they've heard of you before, that's different than this brand new entity that with no name recognition coming in and asking for money. So I think there's that. And the other thing that I find interesting that I just want to sort of add on, if you're self-funded, is by and large, there's research on, this is not my own observation, we tend to hang out in social circles with people that are in similar socioeconomic circles as us, socioeconomic demographics as us. So if you are someone that can self-fund a nonprofit, even for a short amount of time, it's a pretty reliable assumption that you're going to be hanging out with people that have the means to pony up as well. So I think that there's that element too, where if you're in a situation coming from a place of affluence and you're able to do this, that you're running in affluent circles, and that should be where you turn to for funding until you're able to diversify a little bit more. Whereas if you are not coming from that place, and not only do you not have the means to be able to do it, then it's likely that your friends and family aren't going to have the means to support you, which is just another unfortunate strike against you as you're starting this very altruistic and important journey.
Yeah, what happens then in those cases is they fund it and try to do it for a while, and then they bring somebody on board to run it and either pay their salary or raise the funds to pay their salary to continue it, because they don't want, either they want to move on to something else, or they just don't want to be to that degree involved in the day-to-day management of it. They want to support it, and it's important. It's a passion project for them, but they know that to be able to pay for their passion project, they have to go run that business, or that this is just not where their strengths lie. I hear it. I have 2 questions that sort of, as I'm thinking about this and as we're building this out, I hear. One, my next question in theory would be about metrics. Like, I would think about, the same way we talked a little about competition. We didn't talk enough about competition, but think about metrics. How do I know it's working, right? How do I know that the metric I'm using is actually a metric that's actually a good metric, sounds like I'm repeating myself, but those to me are really important questions here as well. Would you say that the same thing here?
Absolutely. Because as you're getting funding from people, as you're turning to others for donations, especially if they're friends and family, they're going to give you because they like you and they're close and they want to see you succeed. But it's going to come a time where they're going to say, okay, so what are we actually trying to accomplish here? Or if you're asking them for real money, they're going to say, what are we trying to accomplish here? So I think on multiple levels, it's important to collect good metrics. One is from the fundraising side of things, to be able to demonstrate that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then on the other side, of course, if you are starting a nonprofit, you actually want to be moving the needle on something as well. So, I don't know what that would look like. I'm thinking quickly on about our giving blankets to the homeless example, but you have to pick a really good metric that says we're doing this. It's having an impact. There are outcomes because of it. And we have stories to tell because of it. And once you have the numbers with the stories, then you can put together something really impressive and start to build it from there. But that's hard to do. It's much easier said than done.
Right. I just using your blanket example, like I'm trying to think of if that person came to me and said they wanted money as a donation to, 10 blankets, and I would want to know it. How did we do anything? Would getting 10 blankets mean we did something? Would giving 10 blankets to 10 homeless people, did that mean we accomplished something? So I guess the follow question, and this is not unique to this conversation about starting. This is a conversation that you have with every nonprofit in terms of just, are they having the impact they say they're having, right? If I cannot define the impact that I want to see, right, or measure the impact I want to see, does that mean I need to go back and start again? Or I myself don't have clarity around it. Like I know as a potential donor or even as a coach or consultant, I might be deeply concerned. Does that mean the founder should be deeply concerned as well?
No, I don't think so, because now I think we picked a good example, right? Because we might not know. It might just break my heart when I see someone who is shivering in the cold and doesn't have a warm coat around them, right? And it might drive me to say, I need to start this nonprofit. I need to put coats on these folks. And I'm driven from that perspective, and I don't have it all worked out in my head. I think that that's okay, because there are creative answers to this question. And even if I don't have them, lucky for me, I'm friends with Bini, who's an amazing coach, and I can sit down with him and I can say, okay, I need to put some creative metrics around this. I need to put some creative outcomes around this so that I know whether I'm really making a difference in these people's lives. And you might think to yourself, and you might say, you know what? Like, it's nice that you give them a coat. Do they have it a week later? Do they have it a month later? Do they have it next year when the winter rolls around? I say, oh, that's really interesting. What if I stay in touch with these people and I figure out if they still have their coat a year later? And all of a sudden, I'm able, after a year of doing this, I'm able to put a meaningful metric to it that says 8 out of the 10 blankets, out of every 10 blankets we give out, stay with the person through the following winter, which just shows you how much they're needed. All of a sudden, like, we've created, using creativity, a metric that is meaningful and can actually show what real outcome is. I didn't start with that, but I think that comes out in conversation. And I think that's part of that advisory committee, that board that you're going to put together has to have that business acumen as well, to be able to put those numbers into place, put those goals into place, so you can tell a real story.
Yeah. I actually that was a good segue actually into boards. Like, at what point do you bring on people, or do you establish, I mean, obviously you have to establish an organization maybe first, but people like that, like, you're starting with an advisory committee, you're starting with 1 or 2 people as people you go to.
So just from a legal perspective, I'm pretty sure you need a board right away, because the board is
leave the legalese out for a second. We didn't even talk about the legalese of any of these things, right? But which is interesting that we didn't even talk about legal. But
yeah, if you would have told me we got through 50 minutes without using the words fiscal sponsor, I would have been surprised.
Fiscal sponsor is something I think about also here, because we'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about boards for a second. Like, are you putting together an advisory committee? Is that what, would you make that one of the first things you're doing? Is or if someone's going to ask you the question, you're going to start a nonprofit, who are the people that you're surrounding yourself with and making this go, right?
That's certainly how I would approach it. But I rely on people smarter than me for like every decision I make in my life. So like that I
Social
think
capital.
for sure, for sure. Financial capital, social capital, business acumen. I think there's no shortage of reasons why you need to surround yourself with people to make this work. Because again, the odds are stacked against you when you're starting off on this venture. So I think to be able to put yourself in the best position to succeed by surrounding yourself with people who know what they're doing and can offer help and advice. You that if I were starting a nonprofit, I'd say one of the first things I would do is put together a handful of people, however many I could find, the more the merrier, and make them part of my journey.
Yeah, I actually saw a great quote. It said that bad boards kill good orgs.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And I really, because to me, like a bad board or that kind of thing is all about the culture of the organization, and the culture is going to kill the organization no matter what it is. So it's just an interesting piece of it, like going it alone here completely, being a lone wolf on this because you're going to be the maverick, you're going to champion the cause, actually is not to your benefit, right? It could be to your benefit in the sense that you're the one running it and you're the day-to-day person and you're the passion. But if you're going it 100% alone, there's no people around you. There's no, I'm going to call them a life vest, but there's no support system in place. You're going to struggle to get people to support you, to buy into what you're doing, to listen to you. And then on those tough days, you're going to be all by yourself. And then there's nothing going on in your organization.
Yeah. For sure. There's a social proof element to it. People are going to see other people's on the documents or on the website or whatever piece of paper you put in front of them, and they're going to say, okay, this is not someone who is by himself. There are other people who are supporting us.
Yeah, I definitely think about that a lot. I think that's and again, meet up people. We should do this. We should do almost like a Shark Tank kind of thing for people with fledgling nonprofit ideas, and
Love it.
probably after an hour find that we have shredded every single one of them. I could think of one or two other people we could bring on to be like sharks in that space and really be exceptionally difficult in the process. I shouldn't do this. I should do something else with my time. But okay, so the fiscal piece, right? You mentioned fiscal sponsorships. To me, that came up as I was thinking about, like, let's say I'm going to start. Okay, I determined that the audience, that's the organizations that are out there, aren't what I'm trying to do. The other models are not models that I want to use, and I want to start, but I need to do this. I need to raise money for it, right? So fiscal sponsorship in my mind came up as a good way financially to have a financial structure that makes sense, that doesn't actually put you in any risk or requirement to set up the legalese of what you're trying to do. And if it doesn't work, you're out pretty quickly, right? So nobody loses, let's say, if you went. I get why people use fiscal sponsorship in the long term and for all kinds of other reasons. To me, that seemed like an easy, I wouldn't say crutch, but an easy place to sort of set it up if I wanted to start. No?
Yeah. In fact, I think there are at least some instances where it's required that you start with a fiscal sponsor before you get your 501c3 status.
Really?
I
didn't even know that.
think.
That makes sense to me.
I think.
I mean, part of me thinks that that's actually not a bad way to go in general, is like you get a fiscal sponsor and you just start a project and you do the project and you don't need to set up another org out there. It seems to make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also seen the pitfalls of that. Once you can take the training wheels off a little bit, and organizations might want more autonomy in the way that they do things that they don't always have because they're beholden to a fiscal sponsor. So one organization that I'm dealing with now is not its own 501c3, and I made some recommendations to them about the way they approach their donate page, and they threw up their hands. We have zero control of it. We can make a request of the sponsoring organization, but like they may say yes, they most likely will say no. So like there are pitfalls that I don't think that should be the reason why someone doesn't go this way, because having it is certainly better than not having it. But it's just something to be aware of as you're doing this.
Okay. We're almost at the hour, so I want to finish up here a little bit. Here's my I wouldn't say my last question. My next question here is, okay, all things have lined up. You've answered all those questions. What's the first thing you're going to start? What's the first thing you're going to do. Like 90-day plan, Raimy Rubin is starting, blankets for, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And give me the first thing.
That is tricky. Again, my mind is going in two totally opposite directions at the same time. On the one hand, I'm thinking, what is my process going to be to make or receive the blankets and my distribution method to be able to give them out? And that's going to be my 90-day plan. It's going to focus on that. And the other part of my brain is going, what's my 90-day plan in terms of fundraising? And how can we make sure that we have enough runway to get through the next 6 months or the next 9 months with people that are starting to understand what we're doing, and we're going to put our name out there, and we're going to be able to go to these people for support. And I think from my backgrounds, being in the nonprofit space for a long time, but on the fundraising side, that's my inclination, is really to go that route and put together a 90-day plan for fundraising. I'm going to start looking at, this is an idea that popped into my head as we were talking earlier, is like, if there are adjacent organizations that work in that sector, then that means that those organizations have funders as well. I'm looking at those organizations' annual reports and their websites to see who's funding them. I'm trying to figure out how I can get in front of those people that clearly care about the homeless, so I can go to those funders and say, I have a new idea. I'm starting to build that list of potential donors so that I have support for the next 6 to 12 months, so that I'm able to go and give out those coats and those blankets.
Yeah, I got it. I'm thinking similarly. I'm thinking actually I would test it, honestly. Like I would either fund the first test or the first few tests or whatever I was doing, or convince a friend to support me in this first endeavor. So if it's coats or blankets, I want to buy the first 10 blankets. I would film the heck out of it and make sure that there was a lot of content around it. And it's not to self-promote me as a person. It's to,
of course,
it's the idea towards the project. Right. I mean, it's not a humble brag. It's a brag straight out. It's like, I want to do this, I'm doing this. And I would have that as a sort of on the back of the social proof of the good work that I'm doing. And then I would, as you said, I would think about the funding going forward. So for me, like the first 3 steps, actually, I should preemptively. Number 1 is really clear on what my mission is and what I'm trying to accomplish. Really, really clear. Right. So I've done that, Mark. That's my first step. Number 2, I'm going to actually test the waters on this to see if this makes any sense. And then number 3, I'm going to film it. And then number 4, I'm going to start going to people for my first set of donations, and then from there, who knows, right? If it actually becomes something or it doesn't become something. But that's how I think of it.
I like your answer a lot better than mine. Granted, you knew you were going to ask the question, so you had time to think about it. I didn't know you were going to ask
that. Right. I also have my super action committee.
Correct. Dan Pelota was guiding you. I didn't get any guidance from him.
No, he was just all over the overhead component of it.
I'm sure he was.
Not everything else. But yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic to sort of to round this conversation out, because people are always starting organizations. They're always starting nonprofits. There's a lot of risk and there's a lot of pitfalls, and you're seeing some of that play out right now based on how people are funded and how they're structured and how they're set up and where they get their funding right now. The USAID thing and federal grants and all that other stuff, and seeing how many people are burned and hurt by those kinds of things. To think about how you go about those things in the first place from the front end in to get that work done. And then on the other side of that is that the waste that exists in a lot of these things too, where they're funding things that shouldn't be funded, and they're providing grants to people who shouldn't be getting them just because they're friends with people and they're connected, not because they're actually solving anything in the world. So I think it sort of hurts a lot of the industry because of the bad actors. And we've talked about bad actors before, and we'll talk about them again. But I think just the conversation is how you think about this, how you think about starting, not to discourage people from starting those things up. I want to emphasize that here at the end. From my perspective, if you have a great idea and you're really passionate about a great idea and you've answered some of the questions that we've asked, definitely do it. Like, you will regret not having done it more than you will have regret starting it and then failing, but definitely start it and see what happens with it. And even if, as you said, you don't have all the answers to all the questions and you're open about the fact that you don't have answers to all the questions, I prefer that every day of the week, and maybe take a chance on something rather than not doing it because I don't have the answers to the questions or I don't know.
Well put.
Awesome. Okay. Another episode in the books.
Another episode in the books.
As I said, if you have a question or concern about this subject or an idea around it, or you're looking to start a nonprofit and you want to bounce it off two guys who are going to convince you not to, this is the place to start that conversation. And we're happy to do it with you. And then when we do the Shark Tank, be there, be square. All right.
All
Thanks.
right.